We talked about the subtle difference, but big difference between envy and jealousy. And last week talking about jealousy, I said that jealousy is wanting to protect what you have. It's, this is mine, no one else can have it. That's a jealous, I'm protecting this possession of mine. Where on envy, on the other hand, it's similar, but it's different. It's wanting what someone else has. So envy is, I want what you have, you've got something, I want it, right? So if you want to learn more about jealousy, you can always go back and watch that online. But today I want to talk about the envy side of things. What do we do with envy? What do we do when we are feeling envious of others, biblically speaking? How do we handle that? What do we do with that? And so to understand envy a little bit more, I'm going to get a little bit nerdy for just a second because I'm a little bit of a word nerd, okay? So bear with me. There's a point to this before your eyes glaze over, okay? Envy in the New Testament was originally written in Greek, and the word for envy in Greek is thonos. And I'm probably saying that wrong. Dina can correct me. I see her over there. So is that right? Thonos? Okay. She got it. She's Greek. She knows what I'm talking about. She knows more than what I'm talking about. She probably knows a lot more than me on this. But thonos is the Greek word for envy. And why do I bring that up? Well, it's rooted in another Greek word. It shares a similar root with the Greek word for eye, which is ophthalmos. Okay, ophthalmos, think of ophthalmologist, right? Like an eye doctor. That's where we get that word from, ophthalmologist, eye. So here's the point. Envy is a disorder that is rooted in our eyes, okay? We see something and we want it. We see that other person who has that thing and we want to have that thing too. See how that works? Makes sense? I think we all kind of get this, right? We all kind of understand this. I see it and I want it. This other person has this possession. They've got that new car. They've got that new phone. They've got that new thing. They've got that beautiful house, whatever it is, right? It's not always possessions either. Sometimes it's they're more beautiful than me. I wish I looked like that. They're more successful than me. I wish I was that successful. They're happier than me. I wish I had their happiness. Whatever it is, we see it in someone else or somebody else has this thing and we want it too. And when we're not careful, envy is this subtle sickness that rots away our souls and it eats away at our happiness and makes us discontented with our lives, and it makes us absolutely miserable as it eats us on the inside. And so I would argue that in our culture today, envy may be one of our greatest temptations. In American culture today, envy is everywhere, isn't it? Everywhere you look, there's advertisements, there's billboards, there's commercials, there's people on social media showing off this new product or this new thing, or look at me, look at that. And it's so easy to look at what they have and just to want it. I've got to have this thing or else I won't be fulfilled until I get that, right? Envy's everywhere. And we used to have this phrase that people would use maybe more often than they do today. When you're talking about trying to keep up with your neighbors, you'd say, keeping up with the what? The Joneses. Yeah, I'm keeping up with the Joneses, right? The Joneses got a new car. I want a new car too. The Joneses got a new house. They just redecorated. They remodeled. I need a remodel. The Joneses went on this amazing vacation. Did you see their pictures on Facebook, right? Like, I need to go on a vacation too. I'm trying to keep up with my neighbors. I'm trying to keep up with the people around me. And it makes you miserable trying to do that. And here's what's funny is it's no longer about keeping up with the Joneses. That phrase came from an old cartoon, actually, that was back in like 1913, the early 1920s, that was in the newspapers. It was a cartoon of the same name. But nowadays, it's no longer keeping up with our neighbors. It's no longer just keeping up with the Joneses. You know what it's about, right? It's keeping up with the Kardashians. That's how far our society has fallen, right? It's no longer just keeping up with our neighbors. Now we're looking at the 1% richest people in the world, and they're posting everything on social media and their reality TV shows, and we're trying to keep up with them. Look at that mansion. I need a mansion. Look at that car. I need a car. Look at how they look. I need to buy all their products, right? I need to look just like them. And we're keeping up with the Kardashians. We're keeping up with these online influencers and celebrities and reality TV people, and it's making us miserable. It's making us sick. If you look, there's studies all over the place. The more you're on social media, the more unhappy you are. Why is that? I would say envy. You're constantly looking at other people's highlights, and you're constantly comparing your life to theirs, and you're feeling like your life is lacking because you don't have what everyone else has. And you're miserable, and you're sick. And it's subtle, but it gets you, right? And we fall into this ancient trap of believing that somehow we are lesser because we don't have more. That somehow our life isn't as meaningful because we don't have what others have. That somehow if we don't obtain that thing, then we will never have lived up to whatever it is we were supposed to have lived up to. And we can get ourselves absolutely worked up and miserable and sick over all of this. It's no good. It's a lie. You see, envy, it's a total sickness. We have this color that we often associate with envy. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Green. Yeah, we're green with envy. You know what that means? Have you ever heard that before? Have you ever wondered where that came from? Why aren't we purple with envy? Why isn't it fuchsia with envy? I don't know. No, the phrase, I was looking at this, I was like, the phrase green with envy, it was popularized by Shakespeare in Othello. He wrote this phrase that jealousy and envy is like a green-eyed monster. So that was popularized back then, but actually it comes from earlier than that, all the way back into Greek culture, back around the time of Jesus. They actually associated the color green with envy because they had this belief that it was a part of a sickness, like you had too much bile built up in your stomach and it literally would turn you green. So you were sick, you were green with envy. That's what they said. And so envy, they would actually relate it like envy, you're sick. You turn green because you're sick, because you got too much bile, or it's a sickness. Now, what's fascinating is it comes from even before Greek culture is even where we get this idea that envy is a sickness. Actually, if you go all the way back to the early biblical times, the time of Solomon, somewhere 900 years BC, 930, somewhere like that, when he wrote the book of Proverbs, Solomon wrote this in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 30. A tranquil heart gives life to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. So a tranquil heart, a peaceful heart, a contented heart gives you life, but envy rots your bones. It's a sickness. Envy is kind of like a cancer that eats you alive from the inside out. The more you let it fester, the more you let it dwell in you, the more you envy someone else, the more it eats you away inside. This goes all the way back to Solomon here, right, in Proverbs, right? Because we just believe this lie that if I just had that, then I would be happy. If I just had that, then I would be fulfilled. Then my life would be complete. And it's a total lie. Why? Because nothing in this world will ever fully and finally satisfy your soul. Nothing. You might get it for a moment, and you have it, and maybe you're content for that minute, and then eventually you got that new phone, and then the new one comes out like a month later. You're like, oh, now I need the new phone, right? You get that car and then it breaks down and you need another car. You know, you get that house and then everything goes out of style. You get that new clothes, the new fashion, and then they come up with another fashion. You got to wait 10 years before it comes back, right? Nothing in this world will ever fully and finally satisfy your soul. I like to think of it this way. You ever gone out to a really nice restaurant where the food was just incredible and maybe someone else was picking up the bill and so you could order as much as you want, right? And you just feast and eat and eat and eat until you are just miserably sick. Anybody else have that problem? I know I do, okay? I love food a little too much. And you eat and eat and eat, and then what do you say when you're so full that you're sick? You go, I'm never eating again. Anyone else say that before? I say it all the time. Never come true. Okay? Because what happens? Dessert rolls around, right? You're like, oh, got to try one of those. No, maybe you really are so full that you're absolutely sick and miserable. Maybe you even get through breakfast the next day and you're like, I'm not even hungry for breakfast. I'm still full from the night before. But then lunch rolls around and it's, your stomach's rumbling and you're hungry again, right? Because it's an appetite. You might feel it for a moment, but eventually you're going to hunger again. You're going to need more food. And envy is kind of that same way. It's like an appetite. It's like a desire that we have that, yes, you might feel it for a minute, but then all of a sudden, after a while, you're hungry again. You may get the thing that you think you needed to be complete, and then you get it, and then after a while, you realize that there's another thing you need, and there's another thing you need. You get to the top of this hill, you climb to this tower of success, and you think you finally arrived, and then you look, and there's another hill. There it is over there. Oh man, I didn't get to that one yet. And it never finally and fully satisfies the desires of your soul. That's how envy works. It's this lie, it's this trap to thinking that once I get it, I'll be complete, but then once you get it, then you realize there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. And you'll never fully be satisfied by anything that this world has to offer. The Bible often equates envy to a sin, and there's different areas in the Bible where they list different sins. Envy is often listed in there. Look at this one. Jesus says this in Mark chapter 7, verse 20. What comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. Envy is an evil that can work inside of you. And it can lead you, the more it festers, the more it rots away, the more this cancer grows, the more it can lead you to do evil and wicked things, trying to get what it is that you so crave, that you so desire so desperately. If you look at the Bible, there's so many different examples you could turn to where you see envy just ruining people's lives in the Bible. You can make the argument that the very first murder in the Bible was caused because of envy. Cain and Abel, if you know the story, Cain and Abel are brothers. Cain kills Abel because Abel is receiving God's favor for his offerings rather than Cain's for his. And we won't get into the details of that. That's a whole other sermon. But Cain kills Abel because he's envious of Abel. And so he wants to kill Abel so he doesn't have to deal with that anymore. It's awful. If you look later in the Bible, one of the founding families of our faith, you've heard the story probably of Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau were twin brothers. They were born to Isaac, who is the son of Abraham. And they are twin brothers, but Esau came out first. So Esau is the firstborn twin, and Jacob is the later born twin. So Jacob is envious of Esau's birthright as the firstborn son. He wants it for himself. And so what does he do? He tricks Esau into giving him his inheritance. Him and his mother conspire to get the blessing of Isaac unbeknownst to Esau. They trick him and they get the blessing for Jacob, and it causes a huge rift in the family. And then what happens? Jacob has to flee because Esau wants to kill him. Right? Same old story, right? Envy just leading to these problems in the family. Then later you think that would be the end of it, but then Jacob runs off and he finds this other family that he lives with, and he meets this woman named Rachel who he falls in love with. She's absolutely beautiful, and he's just head over heels in love with her. And somehow during the whole thing that I don't understand how this even happens, he accidentally marries her older sister not knowing it. And he wakes up the next morning, he's like, that's Leah, that's not Rachel. What do I do here? He was tricked by their father. All right, crazy story. You have to read the Bible. It's nuts, okay? There's some stuff in there. You're like, how does that happen? But that's reality. Things are crazy sometimes. And so he marries Leah, and then he also marries Rachel. So he's married to these two sisters. Okay, Leah is the one that isn't as attractive and she's older, and then Rachel's the beautiful younger one, and he loves Rachel, not Leah. So Leah is envious of Rachel because she is more loved. And Leah then decides, well, how can I help make my husband love me more? I'm going to give him as many sons as I can because that will make me honored. That will make me more loved. And Rachel then envies Leah because Rachel struggles with infertility. So Leah's over here popping out baby boys. Okay, if you read through the story, she has a bunch of sons, and Rachel's over here struggling and envious because she wants to have sons as well so that she will be more honored than her sister, Leah. Okay? Envy, envy, envy. Look at Genesis chapter 30, verse 1. Here's what it says. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." And that's how envy feels, doesn't it? Sometimes we feel like there's just this thing, I have to have it or I'm gonna die. I'm literally gonna die if I don't get that, if I don't achieve that, if I don't have that in my life. My kids tell me that all the time. Dad, if I don't get that, I'm literally gonna die. I'm like, literally? They're like, yes, literally, I'm going to die. I'm like, you're not gonna die. But that's how it feels, right? I'm sure you can relate to that, right? You just feel like if I don't have this, it's going to be over. I've got to do everything I can, whatever cost to have it. And that's what Rachel does. She prays and prays and prays, and she does whatever she can. It leads to this whole mess where Jacob has 12 sons with 4 different women, okay? And because each of the sisters then give them, Jacob, their servant girls as wives as well, so that they can have surrogate children in their honor as well to try to compete with one another. It's this whole thing. They end up having 12 kids. Rachel eventually, by praying, and God blesses her and gives her a son. She names him Joseph. And then later, much later in life, she ends up having another son, and she actually dies in childbirth to her son Benjamin. And so literally, she thought she was going to die without kids, and she actually died because she had a kid, which is kind of ironic and sad, and probably a whole nother story, right? A whole nother sermon right there. But this whole thing is just envy all throughout their lives that just splits them up and causes them to constantly compete with one another, and it makes them miserable, and it literally leads to the death of Rachel. Now, you think the story's over, but the generational sin of envy just continues in the family. It's just this whole cycle, right? Because then you go to the sons, the 12 sons who end up becoming the 12 tribes of Israel. You've probably heard about that before if you're in church long enough, right? Those 12 sons, you've heard the story of Joseph. Joseph is the favorite. Why? Because he's Rachel's firstborn. So Jacob loves Joseph, makes it absolutely obvious. All the brothers are envious and they hate Joseph, so they throw him into a well and they sell him into slavery in Egypt. Okay, divides the family, breaks everybody's hearts. Like it's just this horrible cycle of envy all throughout, right? And God somehow still uses it for his good, but it's a mess. And you can just see how this envy just is like a sin that just creeps up in your life, like this cancer that just rots away the bones, as the Bible says, that just makes us sick, and it can lead us to do all sorts of evil things and destroy relationships and just make us miserable in the end, seeking what we think is going to make us happy, but it really just makes us unhappy and discontent. It's all envy, and it's ugly. And so often envy leads to other things, like one is coveting. Coveting, I would say, is like envy, very similar, but it takes it even a step further. What I mean by that is envy is often you want what someone else has. They got it, I want it. But coveting is a little bit further than that. Coveting is I want to take what they have for myself. I want what you have, exactly what you have, so I'm going to take it from you, right? It's not just I want your car, it's I'm going to steal your car. Right? Envy might be like you have an amazing marriage and someday I dream and hope and I'm envious of it and I want to have a good marriage myself. Coveting says, I want your wife. I'm going to take her for me, right? That's coveting. It's a whole nother step further. And it's a horrible thing the Bible often talks about, right? Jesus says this in Luke chapter 12, verse 15. And he said to them, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And we know that's true. Your life isn't about the abundance of your possessions, but it's really hard to live that way sometimes, isn't it? Yeah, life isn't about how much stuff I have, but I'd really like to try and see how much I can get, right? We know that. Like, I don't have to have all this stuff, but it sure would be great if I did, you know? So we may know that this is true, but we don't always live it that way, do we? And before long, this envy, this subtle sickness sinks into our lives and it rots our bones. Here's an example of how this worked in my life. My wife and I, we loved to watch this show back in the day on HGTV called Fixer Upper. Anyone else a Fixer Upper fan? You know what I'm talking about? Chip and Joanna Gaines over here, like they made famous by this show, and now they've got this whole like industry going on. And supposedly good Christian people as far as I know, and nothing against the show or anything, right? My wife and I, we were watching the show over and over and over again. It was always on reruns over and over on the HGTV, so we turned it on and it's just one after the next. And the way the show works is they find this old house, it's broken down and it's terrible, and they get this couple, they talk this couple into buying the house, and then they completely remodel the house, overhaul it, and then you're left with this pristine, like, palatial mansion. You're just like, oh, wow, this looks incredible, right? And what I realized is the more that we were watching this show, the more I was looking at all these beautiful kitchens and new living rooms and all these other things, the more I looked at these houses, the more I looked at my house and went, oh, I got a fixer-upper. You know, this isn't it. You know, if you see the show, it's like my walls aren't shiplap. Not everything in my house is gray and beige. Like, it's not modern, it's not cool, it's not this, it's not that. And you look at all these other beautiful houses and you go, I want that house. And you know what I realized, though, is the more I'm watching the show with my wife, the more I'm getting envious. The more I'm wanting what these other people have, and the more I'm unhappy with what I do have. And what's crazy is I have a great house. My wife and I, we built this beautiful house. It's fine. It's great. It's everything that we could possibly need. Is it a fixer-upper, palatial, beautiful, remodeled masterpiece? No. But is it everything I need? Absolutely. And yet I was getting discontent because I'm sitting there feeding my eyes with images of all these more beautiful houses. And it left me envious. So I talked to my wife about it. I sat her down. I was like, look, this is going to be a hard conversation, but we've got to stop watching Fixer Upper. And she rebuked me, and then eventually I got her to understand. And we stopped watching the show because it was leading me to be unhappy with what I did have. And she probably still holds it against me. You can ask her about it later. She's sitting over here. But that's how it worked in my life, right? It's subtle. It kind of creeps in. There's nothing bad about the show, nothing against the show. If you like the show, I got no problems with it. It was something in my life that was leading me to be envious of other things that I didn't have. And it was leading me to not be content and thankful for what I did have. And so it was a problem. So envy is this subtle cancer that it gets in through your eyes and then it festers in your soul. And if you're not careful, it starts to rot your bones. And there's a cure. This is the good news. The good news is there's a cure. The cure for envy is contentment. Contentment's the cure for envy. So be content. Let's close in prayer. I'm just kidding. No, there you go. No, I'm just kidding. Because that's really easy to say, right? But it's hard to do. It's really easy to say, just be content. Just be happy with what you have. Just be content. How do we do that? Right? That's a little easier to say than it is to actually live. So when we talk about envy is wanting what somebody else has. But if you're thinking about contentment is satisfaction in what you have. You're satisfied in what you have. And I would say as a Christian, I would take this even a step further. It's true contentment is not just being satisfied because I have enough. True contentment is satisfaction in what God has given you. You're so satisfied and just thankful that everything comes from the Lord, that he has given you everything that you could possibly need, and that if I have nothing else but I have the Lord on my side, then I'm good. That's true Christian contentment. If I have nothing else but I have Christ, I am the richest man on the planet because he has given me every spiritual blessing and everything that I could ever need, and he's forgiven me of so much, and I have a home in heaven with him for all eternity and treasures immeasurable. I've got everything I could ever need because he's enough for me. That's true contentment. I was reading this book earlier this week as I was studying for this. There's a guy, he's an old English pastor, Puritan pastor named Jeremiah Burroughs, writing this book in the 1600s. He wrote this book that ended up becoming a Christian classic. It's called The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. Talking about this rare jewel that's hard for people to find, but it's this rare jewel of Christian contentment. And he defined Christian contentment this way. I thought it was really good. He said, Christian contentment is that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition. Now, I know that's a lot of words, but when you think about that, it's this sweet, gracious, quiet spirit that you have that freely submits to the Lord and delights in following and submitting to him no matter what in his fatherly and amazing wisdom that he decides to bring your way. Whether it's good or whether it's bad, I am freely submitting and delighting in the Lord in all situations and all circumstances. That's true Christian contentment. Whether the good seasons or whether the bad seasons. You're content because you have Christ, and that's enough. And so Paul writes about this in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6. He says this, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." And then he continues, he says, "As for the rich," in verse 17, "in this present age, charge them not to be haughty nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They're to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life." Everything we have in this world, we can't bring anything into the world with us, and we can't take anything out of the world with us, right? So everything that we accumulate here is just going to be piled up for somebody else when we leave. You can't bring it with you. I heard a joke once, you can't bring a U-Haul, you never see the U-Haul at the funeral, right? Because you can't bring it with you. You can't take your stuff with you. So you spend your whole life pursuing these things and taking all these things and achieving and piling up this stuff, and what do you have to show for it in the end? You can't bring any of it with you anyways. Moth and rust destroy, things wear away eventually. You can't take it with you. So what do? The true riches and the true treasure is a life pursuing God. a life of pursuing Christ and Christ alone, desiring nothing but him and the treasure that he is. That's what we need to be focused on. That's how we find true contentment. So how do you be content? How do you do that? How do you find that? I got bad news and I got good news. The bad news is you can't on your own, right? Just be content. Just try harder, right? Just push down those desires. Don't think about it. You can try that for a while, but on your own, you're going to still continue to struggle with envy. You're going to continue to struggle with these desires. So how do we do it? The good news is that God saves us from our sins. God saves us from envy. And the true good news is that if we submit our lives to God, if we pursue him and we submit our lives to him and we take joy in him, then he's going to change our desires to what he desires. And he's going to shape us and mold us through the Spirit of God in us as we follow Christ. And he's going to shape our desires so that we are more content in him. That's how we do it. Paul says this. He gives us the secret in Philippians 4, verse 11. It says, I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things, this is the secret, through him who strengthens me. The secret to contentment, according to Paul, is Christ. I can do everything. I can be content in all situations through Christ, because if I'm rich, then great, I have Christ. And if I'm poor, I still got Christ. I could be the most financially poor person in the room, but with Christ, I'm the richest person, richest spiritually, right? The richest person on the planet. And nobody can take that away from me. Whether I am healthy or whether I'm sick, I've got Christ and I am content because nobody can take that from me. The riches fade, beauty fades, health fades, but Christ is forever. So hang on to him, cling to him. So the bottom line is this: envy's a cancer, and the only cure is contentment in Christ. That's the cure. Pursue him, treasure Christ. Now I got a confession to make. As I said earlier, this is something that, even as a pastor, envy's subtle. It sinks into your life, right? You expect the pastor to be perfect. Nope. Sorry, hate to break your bubble, right? It's something that's still something that creeps in my life. Early in my years in ministry, it was really, really tough. In my early 20s, I graduated college right when the economy totally collapsed and churches didn't have a whole lot of money. They were cutting back on staff. So I'm working at jobs that pay peanuts at the church just so I can serve the Lord. And I'm looking around trying to support my wife and trying to support my daughter that was just about to be born. And then right as I went into ministry and here I am looking around, looking at other people who had taken different career paths and done other things, and they've got all this good stuff, and they're doing these things, and I'm looking around going, barely making enough money to pay my bills and support my family, and it's hard. You start to envy, right? And if you've ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. It starts to build up, and you start to question. I started to doubt, did I choose the wrong path? Should I have not gone into ministry? There's other pastors over here. Oh my gosh, look how successful they are. They're reaching all these people, and here I am, working away in this little church, barely getting paid anything, struggling. And you start to envy and you start to wonder, right? And you see how it just sinks in. It starts to Satan can use this just to rot you away. And one of the best things for me was as I was wrestling through this stuff, is I was able to just say, you know what? It's not about anything in this world. I got to keep my head on straight and keep focused on Christ, because if I follow him and I pursue him, that's all I want. Whether my ministry is huge or my ministry is small, I just want to pursue Christ and do everything I can to tell others about him. And so it changed my world when I started just being content in Christ, rather than worrying about what everybody else has or what everybody else was doing or who was successful and who wasn't, all that stuff, all that garbage. So how do we find this rare jewel of Christian contentment? How do we learn to be content? I want to give us 3 quick things that I think as we walk away today, that hopefully are helpful. 3 paradoxes of contentment. A paradox is just something that sounds not true at first, sounds contradictory at first, but the more you examine it, the more you realize it's true, right? And so here's 3 paradoxes of contentment that I think will be helpful. Number 1 is that contentment is not getting your desires, but changing your desires. It's not getting everything you want, but changing what you want, okay? That's true contentment. The Bible says it this way, Psalm 37:4. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Now, we take this and interpret this the wrong way sometimes. We think that God's like a genie. We rub the lamp, and he gives us a wish, right? And he's going to give me everything I desire. Yay! This sounds great if you take it that way. But that's not what he's saying here, okay? It says, delight yourself in the Lord. Make your desires his desires. Conform yourself to him. Mold and shape your heart to be more and more like his. And then as you desire what God desires to give you what you desire because you're desiring what he desires as well. Make sense? It's shaping and changing your desires, not to even wanting less, but actually wanting more, because God is more than anything lesser in this world. So it's not just desiring less or wanting less, it's changing and shaping your desires to want something even greater, to wanting God, to wanting to pursue Christ, to realizing what he's done for you and putting him first and foremost in your life. And he is the full satisfaction and fulfillment of your desires. That's what it's talking about there. So treasure Christ first and foremost. Contentment is in getting all your desires, but changing your desires. The second one is contentment sees good and evil. It sees the good and evil. Jeremiah Burroughs, in that book I was talking about earlier, he wrote this. I thought it was pretty profound. He said, a contented heart looks to God's disposal and submits to God's disposal. That is, he sees the wisdom of God in everything. In his submission, he sees his sovereignty, but what makes him take pleasure is God's wisdom. The Lord knows how to order things better than I. The Lord sees further than I do. I only see things at present, but the Lord sees a great while from now. And how do I know but that had it not been for this affliction, I should have been undone? And think about that. How do you know that if it wasn't for that hardship in your life, you wouldn't have been unraveled? That your life wouldn't have been a complete mess if it wasn't for that hardship that you dealt with? That maybe your pride would have gotten so big because everything was going so great that you would have completely missed the boat. That you would have completely thought that you could do everything on your own and totally rejected God. Maybe he allowed that hardship into your life to get your attention and turn you back to him. Maybe, you don't know that your life, that you wouldn't have been the person that God wanted you to be if that difficult season and time wouldn't have shaped you into the person that God wanted you to be. So contentment isn't just saying, oh, everything's good and I'm happy. It's saying, this is hard, that is evil and it's attacking me, but there's good in it. And I trust God and his wisdom that he's going to see me through it and that he's going to use this to accomplish his purpose. And I can trust him in that. So contentment sees the good and the evil. And then the last one here is contentment focuses on the day over the ideal. Focuses on the daily over the ideally. That's maybe another way to think about it. What I mean by that is, we get this ideal picture in our minds of what life should be, of the life I should have had, the parents I should have had growing up. It should have been like this and it wasn't, so I'm upset and I'm not content. My marriage should be like this and it's not, it's kind of over here instead. And we get this picture, this perfect thing in our mind. My house should look like the fixer-upper house. My car should be this and my career should be this and I'm going to be respected like this. And we get this beautiful, perfect picture world that's not real in our minds. And when our real life doesn't compare to our ideal life, we get miserable and discontented and envious of others who we think life does look like that for them. And so rather than focusing on this ideal dream that isn't reality, what we need to do instead is focus on the day. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. Focus each day. We got enough trouble of its own, right? We got to focus on what God has put in front of us here. What situation has God put us here? How do we be faithful in the day that God has given us, whether it's difficult or whether things are going really well? How do I be faithful in this? What is God calling me to do in this? Now, it doesn't mean we don't hope and we don't dream and we don't pray that God would help our situation to be better or to improve. Okay, you still do that, but you be faithful in the day and stop living in some ideal dream world that isn't reality. And it's really easy to get caught up into that. I know that for sure. So what do we do with that? These are three things I think might help you out as you're trying to just wrestling envy to the ground and trying to be more content in Christ. Because envy is this cancer and the only cure is contentment in Christ. So my question then is, where is envy coming after you? How is it creeping into your life? What are you doing when you find yourself being the most envious? Is it something you're watching? Is it something you're looking at? Is it hanging around with people who are flaunting all the good stuff they have and you're just feeling envious of them? Whatever it is, right? Where is envy creeping into your life? Maybe it's because you're online just shopping and constantly just looking for that next thing and buying things. It makes you feel good when you order it and then you get it and you look at it and you're like, this is so great. You feel happy and then you put it in the pile of all the other stuff you just bought and then you move on to the next thing. All right, whatever it is, how is envy creeping into your life? Where is it getting you? Because it's a subtle sickness, but it'll rot your bones if you let it dwell too long. So get your eyes off the world. The world will never fully and finally satisfy. Christ alone is the only thing that will ever fully and finally satisfy your soul. He's eternal. He's forever, and he has forgiven you of so much if you just trust and put your faith in him. So seek Christ first, treasure Christ first, and you will find true contentment in him alone.
Well, thank you again for watching to the end of Pastor Brandon's message on envy. If you want to see the companion message about jealousy, click right here. Now, you know how YouTube works, so do all the YouTube things to make sure that you never miss a video and help us reach more people. Speaking of helping us reach more people, please prayerfully consider clicking the give link in the description below. Now, if you're in the Phoenix area, we invite you to come and see us in person. Visit az.church for more information. See you next week.